Hey everyone, Aisha here. So I've been thinking about something for about a week now. So I was thinking about how sometimes we can stand in faith and we might know what we want from the Lord. We might know what we're trusting Him for. We might know what we're praying and fasting Him for. So we can be focused on the blessings, right? We can be focused on the promises of God. But one of the things that I realized this week was that we're focused on the promises and the blessings, and that's good, right? But one missing part of that equation is to be able to ask the Lord in prayer to be able to receive the blessings that He has given to you. And so it's like a lot of things that have just been going through my mind, but I'm going to share one story with you, and then I'm going to actually jump into Numbers 14 to be able to teach a little bit more from Scripture, from a time in Scripture where people weren't able to receive God's blessings because they didn't know how to receive it. And so there's an example that I learned about. There was this couple who had been standing in faith for a very long time for something that they wanted from the Lord, right? They were really just excited, praying and fasting over this one particular thing. And it took a long time, and they stood in faith for like decades, right? And what they were praying and fasting for was not happening. And so they finally gave up, began making plans to move forward in their life without the thing that they had been trusting God for, believing God for, praying for, and everything. And finally they gave up. They were just like, you know what, it's just not going to happen. So we might as well. So what they did is they decided to plan their lives and effectively give up on the dream that they had been trusting and believing God for years, for decades, right? And finally, God allowed that thing that they had been praying for, that they had been fasting for, to come to pass. And so because it had been so long, because they had given up on that particular dream, when they were presented with the thing that they really wanted and their hearts craved, they not only rejected it, their hearts hardened, they got angry at God, and they said that they don't want it. After all of that, they said that they didn't want it. And that's when I got that epiphany. I said, you know what? We have to learn how to pray for the ability to receive God's blessings. Because if we don't have that foundation, if we don't have that foundation of being able to receive the blessings of God or receive the promises of God when they happen, then our hearts can be hardened and we can reject the very thing that we have been praying, asking, and believing God for. We can be rejecting the blessings and the answered prayer, right? And so when I realized that, it was just so powerful, because immediately my mind turned to the story of the children of Israel, when for 400 years they had been asking the Lord to deliver them from slavery, because, they had a rich history and they knew it. They knew that, their great grandfather Abraham, was this powerful man, and he had many sons, and many sons had Father Abraham, and they were descendants of them, right? And so, don't mind me, I'm just having fun because that song Father Abraham started singing in my head. But anyway, so they realized the rich history that they were from. They knew the promises of God. They knew the story of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? They knew those things. But yet their current situation, right, in slavery was very different from their history. And they continued to cry out to God in prayer. And finally, God brought the deliverer in the form of Moses, who went before Pharaoh and said, "Let my people go," right? And after 10 plagues, Pharaoh finally let them go. And not only did Pharaoh let them go, but the people of Israel walked out of Egypt in triumphant praise with the wealth of Egypt in their hands. They were carrying it out with them. Fast forward, they went through a number of, tests. They went through a number of trials, and their faith was being tested. And they just grumbled and complained, blasphemed against God, and really turned to false idols, created a golden calf to sacrifice to false idols. And so God had kind of had it, at this point. But then it got even worse, right? It got even worse. So finally, God in all his mercy kept forgiving him over and over and over again, right? And then, and finally they get to the edge of the promised land. And so Moses sends out 12 spies to spy the land. And the people of Israel, they were kind of waiting in anticipation for the report from the land, so they knew what they needed to do to take the land and finally have and obtain the promise that God had promised them so many hundreds of years ago. They were finally on the cusp of receiving that promise. But then the spies went out, saw that there were giants in the land, and the spies were so overcome with fear that all they could focus on was the giants. They couldn't see the milk and honey flowing in the land. They couldn't see the wonderful lushness of crops and food and beauty and provision of the land. All they saw were obstacles. All they saw were promises. All they saw were, it took too long. All they saw were, barriers to their ability to see what it was that God had promised them all those years ago, and they rejected it. They rejected it. When it came time for the spies to give a good report or to report out what they had seen, they gave an evil report and they rejected. They said, you know what? I know this has been what, the people of Israel have been praying for, believing for, walking on foot for, battling famine, thirst, hunger, opposition, war, all of these things, right? They had went through so much, and when it was finally time for them to receive God's blessings, they said they didn't want it. And this is where we pick up in Numbers 14. And so, and actually, you know what? I'm going to start off in Numbers 13. And so, Numbers 13, verse 25. And it says, at the end of 40 days, they returned from spying out the land. And they came to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told him, we came to the land which you have sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Right? So they have proof that God was not a liar. They have proof that the land that God said was actually good. They were holding the proof in their hand of the promise. And then verse 28 is where everything changes. And it says, however, the people in the land are strong and their cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the Negev. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the hill countries. And the Canaanites dwell by the sea along the Jordan. And so this was the spies. These were like 10 of the 12 spies. I know it looks good. I know we've been traveling. I know this is what we've been hoping for and wanting and believing and trusting God for. And I know it looks good, but we don't want it because the opposition to achieving the thing that God promised is too great. And so in verse 30, Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it. So he was just like, no, let's go receive it. Let's go receive it. We're capable of receiving the blessings of God. So let's go receive it. And then the man who had gone up with him and said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are. So they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying, the land, though which we have gone to spy out, is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people that we saw in it of our great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who came from Nephilim, and we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers. So we seemed to them. So they questioned who they were. They no longer saw themselves as powerful in the Lord, or that the Lord was their strength. They saw themselves as if they did not matter. And here's where we pick up in chapter 14, which we're going to be focused on today. So you hear the background, right? The people of Israel were hoping for a promise, but they did not know how to receive it. And here's where it gets juicy, right? in chapter 14. Then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night. And all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, "What, that we had died in the land of Egypt, or that we had died in the wilderness? Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become prey. Would it not have been better? Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt?" Put a pin there, right? I want you to remember that part. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? And then they said to one another, "Let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt." And Joshua and Caleb, I'm going to skip down. They said, the land, and this is verse 7b, "The land which we have passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us, the land that flows with milk and honey." So Caleb and Joshua are like, please, like, look, if the Lord promises us this, he's going to give it to us. So let's not give up on the hope and the promise of the Lord that he will do everything that he said that he would do. Don't give up on that. But the people, their minds were set. And even though they saw evidence of the manifestation of the promises of God, they wanted to go back because they lost heart. They lost courage. They lost their sense of self. They no longer believed who God said that they were, and they no longer believed in God and his promises and his power, despite what they had just witnessed with the parting of the Red Sea, despite what they had just witnessed in terms of the 10 plagues that led up to their being free, despite the fact that they were in Egypt, broke, slavery, mistreated, oppressed, but yet they walked out with their heads held high and wealthy, with the wealth of Egypt in their hands. But they let their fear, they let their discouragement cause them to reject the very blessing of God that they waited their entire lives for. And I say that because this has been on my heart, like even for myself, to be able to be like, you know what? There have been times in my life where I have literally been, had amazing opportunities in front of me, but I either said no or didn't follow up because something in me caused me to not believe that I was worthy enough to be able to receive the very, very blessing and opportunity that I had been asking God for years. And what I realized in that is that unhealed trauma can cause us to have such a low view of God, to have such a low view of who we are in God, that when we're presented with goodness, when we're presented with great opportunities, when we have great opportunities to advance our careers, our businesses, or ministries that we're involved in, we say no because of the past trauma. In my case, the words of their twins' dad would echo into my head saying, "You're not good enough. You're going to fail. Nothing is going to work. You're just like everything," right? Those words began to echo into my mind like this awful recording track. And that caused me to self-sabotage because I did not believe that I was worthy enough for the opportunity to come to pass. And I questioned whether or not God was right in choosing someone like me, where obviously somebody else told me I shouldn't have those things. So, and I believed it. And so at times we can get to the point where we get so excited about the work. We can get so excited about walking in the dream. We can get so excited by looking at our vision board and our scriptures that we're reciting over and over and over again for what we want or what we hope or what we're believing God to do in our lives. And when we get to the cusp of the breakthrough, we can turn around, walk away, and reject it because we don't feel worthy. Sometimes the preparation can feel like moving forward, but it's not. It's moving stagnant. If you're saying no to the things that you're supposed to say yes to advance the cause. And let's be very careful with what I'm saying. Preparation is important, but when you prioritize preparation over walking in the promise, it becomes stagnation, right? It becomes stagnation. And I realize that there's a certain level of comfort in hiding and wishing to do what God has called you to do. It can feel like purpose, but yet it can be hiding. And the other thing that can cause you to not end up walking or not being able to receive the blessings of the Lord is it takes longer than you think. So the children of Israel didn't expect the process to take as long as it did. And I'm saying this is different from the whole wandering of 40 years, because this was the thing. This was the moment where God had it and sentenced them to wander for 40 years. But, they went the long way. If you look at Exodus, I forget exactly where it is. It is right when they walked out of Egypt. They said, okay, it's Exodus 13. Exodus 13 verse 17, it says, when Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, lest the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. But God led the people around by the way of the wilderness towards the Red Sea, and the people went up out of the land of Egypt equipped for battle. And so what the Bible says is that God took them the long route. They thought that they were going to get there faster, but God took them the long route because he knew that they weren't equipped for the battles that they would face. And so the process was taking longer than they thought. And so they became impatient, similar to that family that I shared earlier. The process in their minds was taking longer than they thought. And by the time God said yes, they no longer wanted it. And we see this here. The process was taking longer than they thought. They thought it was going to be shorter. And the process we're on 3. The process may be harder than you expect. So the children of Israel, they faced famine, thirst, opposition and war. We see during the times where, they had bitter water, and Moses threw, I think it was a stick in there, and the water was made sweet. He hit a rock and water poured out of it because they were thirsty. They were hungry. And so they used to complain about being hungry. And so God gave them manna from the sky, but then they complained about manna and said that at least they had meat in Egypt. And so they wanted to go back to slavery way before this bad report, because they said that they missed the food. Can you, this is how crazy that sounds, right? The people were up there in a hot desert of Egypt, building bricks without straw, being beaten, being oppressed. And remember, with the story of Moses, where it picks up, the babies were being thrown in, it was genocide, right, against the baby boys. And so, which is how Moses ended up getting saved in the beginning, because his mom hid him for 3 months and put him in a basket. Pharaoh's daughter picked up the basket, raised Moses as her own son, right? So Moses was plucked out of the water, meant for death. And so these people were able to get free from genocide, oppression, being beaten, just overall mistreated. And because of food, because they didn't get meat in the wilderness, after they left, they wanted to go back to Egypt. And the Lord was like, okay, I'm going to send some quail out the sky for you guys because you keep complaining about some food. And so now this is the second time they wanted to go back to Egypt. At least the second time. I think it was the second time. And this time they got serious. They had plotted to kill Moses and Aaron and choose a new leader to go back. Because the process took longer than they thought. It was harder than they thought. They had to overcome more difficulties than they thought. They had to go to battle to be able to continue on, to proceed throughout the land. And they knew that they were going to have battle once they got into the land. And they just did not think that they were up to the task. And so it was harder than they thought it was going to be. And so they wanted to go back to oppression, to slavery. And so I was thinking about this, like, in different examples, right? And I'm reminded of American slavery. There were slaves who escaped slavery, but because of the difficulty of the process of navigating through the woods and the terrain and the opposition and the cold and the hunger, the heat, in order to get from the south to the north, some people turn back mid-journey to voluntarily go back to slavery without even being caught. That's why Harriet Tubman said, you're going to keep going or you're going to perish, because she was used to the people being overcome because of how difficult it was, that they were willing to go back. And she said, I can't let you go back, because they would give up the location and the Underground Railroad and the establishment that would allow them to get the freedom. So she said, you're going to come dead or alive, right? That was what Harriet Tubman said. And so I was thinking about like that, like the people who were willing to go back, knowing that if they went back after they escaped, that they were going to be beaten as an example for the other slaves not to escape. And so, like, it has to take some sort of, like, mental, like, messed upness to be able to do that. But that's what the people of Israel were willing to do. And I was thinking about it too. Like, even after American slavery fell and Civil War happened and the people in the South were free from slavery, there were people who were so used to being slaves that during the period of the Reconstruction, they did not leave their plantation. They stayed on their plantation as sharecroppers because they were so used to slavery. They were so used to the oppression. They were so used to the wilderness season that they could not leave. And this is why we have to be able to pray for the ability to be able to receive the blessings that God has for us. And I'm on number 4 now, I think, because we can get so used to our wilderness season that we no longer know how to operate from a state of ease, peace, wealth, security. We get used to the struggle. And sometimes that's what I think happens with single moms. We can get so used to the struggle. We can get so used to the narrative of the struggle for single moms. The financial challenges, the support challenges, the mental health challenges, whatever struggle it might be, not enough time struggle, that we can end up identifying with the struggles of the role and adopt that as our own identity and be unable to live in the peace, security, abundance, prosperity, love, joy, grace, mercy that the Lord promises us as children of God. As children of the Most High God. Our status as children of the Most High God did not evaporate when we became single mothers. It didn't. And this is why we have to be very careful about what we come into agreement with over our lives and the lives of our children. And number 5, I think we're on. The enlarging of our territory can look different than we expected. See, most of the spies missed the fact that the land was filled with milk and honey because they were so focused on the giants. I don't think they expected the cities to be fortified like they were. I don't think that they expected for it to be well armed like it was. Part of me wonders if they thought that they were going to walk on in and take the land. But they had experienced war. They had been defeating the giant, like they had defeated Ai. They had defeated so many of the big names at that time, and they had victory after victory after victory after victory. But for some reason, when they saw the giants, they lost faith, they lost confidence, and I think that they thought that this new battle was so far beyond what they were used to that they no longer had the faith that they can believe that they can do it. So the enlargement of their territory can look differently than what they thought. And this reminds me, as I was thinking and preparing this message, I was reminded of 2014 when I prayed I said, Lord, enlarge my territory. And so I was literally praying for that. And at the time, I was not a mom. Being a mom was not even on my radar at that point. But I just remember praying for that. And this is towards the end of 2014. And so I was literally, because I had already released the book, it became a #1 Amazon bestseller in this category. I was getting speaking engagements, national media features, and things were beginning to pick up for me. And so I was just like, Lord, enlarge my territory, because in my mind, enlarging my territory meant book sales, more speaking engagements, more money. That's what I had in mind when I prayed for enlarging my territory. But what ended up happening is about a month or so later, I ended up getting pregnant with twins. And the Lord enlarged my territory in a way that I didn't imagine. And so even before the father of the twins tried to convince me to get an abortion, I considered abortion initially, because the enlargement of my territory came differently than what I expected. For me, I didn't see how being a mom of twins as a single mom could possibly fit into what I thought enlarging territory meant. I thought that it was, the more money and everything and more opportunities for the book. And I considered terminating the blessing and the enlargement that God placed inside of me. And I almost, to be honest, when he started pressuring me, talking the same thing and drawing on those same fears that I had about continuing on in a pregnancy and using that as a pressure point, saying that if I had these kids, I would destroy my career and my finances, which were big fears of mine about the pregnancy. And so, and he almost, like, it, by the grace of God, when I called the abortion clinic, they didn't answer the phone. But I almost aborted the enlargement of the territory that God gave me because it looked differently than what I expected it to look. And I remember my sonographer spoke so much life into me during the season when I was really vulnerable. And she said, I know you do this work with finances for women, but just imagine what God can do to you through that. He can grow like this mission and this mission and this movement way more than you can ever imagine. Right? And so that began to give me the hope that this pregnancy wasn't a curse, but it was a blessing. And it took me a little while longer to be able to see it, way after I became a mom, to be able to see that, I don't know how many, at least a year later after I gave birth, to be able to see that this pregnancy, the twin pregnancy, was what God was using to enlarge the territory. I think my kids were probably a year old before I realized that. And the Lord had me move from teaching single women about finances to teaching single moms. I was like, oh, wow, the impact that I can have with this. Wow, God sure did have a funny way of answering that prayer. But because it didn't look like what I expected it to, I almost aborted it. Because the enlargement of the territory looked differently than what I expected. I don't even know what number I'm on. But the next one is doubt, because I went out of order. That's why I don't know. I know I have 7 in total. Doubt because of the opposition. Like the Red Sea moments where it can look like God isn't going to come through can cause us to doubt. And it can cause us to doubt God's goodness. It can cause us to doubt if God is going to be faithful, right? Those things can cause us to doubt. And I'm flipping to the Red Sea. And I could just picture in my mind how God said this. And so the people were had their back to the Red Sea, they were facing the Egyptians, and they were just crying. Oh Lord. And so it says Israel cried out to the Lord. I guess they probably wanted to go back to Egypt at least 3 times, because they wanted to go back to Egypt here too. Why'd you take us out of Egypt? They're just and then listen to this. And then he said, Because while they were in Egypt, in verse 12, they said, didn't we say to you while in Egypt, leave us alone and we might be able to serve the Egyptians? Or it'd be better to stay there. Like, these people kept trying to go back. They didn't even want to leave Egypt, right? Because they were so familiar with their opposition. They were comfortable in their opposition, and we can become comfortable in our opposition as well. And so, and then Moses said to the people, fear not, stand firm and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You only have to remain silent. And here's where, like, in my mind, I hear it kind of funny. I'm like, just imagine how God said this. And then in verse 15, the Lord says to Moses, why do you cry out to me? Tell the people of Israel to go forward. Like, what are you doing? Go forward. And so their doubt, like the people of Israel were so focused on the opposition that they forgot God. They forgot God. And sometimes this can look like, friends turning on you. The promotion that you thought you were going to get fall through. The opportunity fell through. Or doubt, fear, whatever that might be that you're going through. But it can cause you to doubt God. It can cause you to not walk in the promises of God, because the opposition on the way to receiving the blessing can seem so great. You can't give up. And the last thing that I want to say, this is number 7. It may require a difficult pruning season before you see the promise which can lead. And so when you're going through a pruning season, is hard, right? Because if you think about gardening, right, when the plants are being pruned, they're being pruned of like dead leaves. They're being pruned of, branches that aren't producing, like tomato plants. If you've ever gardened and you have a tomato plant, you cut off like some of the branches that aren't going to produce the flowers, because if you allow some of the branches that, I think, what are they? They're called suckers, I think. And so what can happen is the plant can spend so much energy into producing new leaves that their plant isn't directing the energy into producing flowers that turn into tomatoes, that turn into the ultimate tomatoes that can grow the harvest. And so in a pruning process with the Lord is cutting off the dead branches, cutting off the dead leaves, cutting off the branches that won't bear fruit. But that hurts. That causes trauma to the plant. But what happens is that temporary trauma begins to be healed over naturally by the plant. But now the plant is stronger and is able to bear more fruit or bear more vegetables, because the dead weight is now gone. And that pruning process can be very difficult. It can be very hard. And that pruning process can cause us to give up. But though that pruning process is necessary to be able to receive the promises of the Lord and actually be able to walk in them, to thrive in it, to move forward in it. Because if we're unpruned, if we have too much of our old self, if we have too much of our old thinking, if we have too much of our old bad habits, if we have our old way of seeing a situation, then it can cause us to mismanage the blessing that God has for it. And the blessing can no longer look like a blessing. It can look like a curse, or it can cause problems, or you can lose it. Kind of like lottery winners who can win millions of dollars at one time. But most of those people, if not all, do not keep it because they don't know how to receive the blessing. And when they don't know how to receive the blessing, when they get it too fast, they're not pruned, they lose it. Or they are unable to stand against the opposition that came with the blessing, because jealousy came, envy came, false friends came, liars came, and they did not have the ability to discern the truth from the lie. They did not have the ability to put boundaries. They did not have the ability to steward it well. And they lost it. And the people who lost it were worse than what they ever were before they got it. And God in his grace and in his mercy wants to protect you. And so sometimes when things are taking too long, sometimes it's spiritual warfare, that's true. But sometimes it's God's pruning process to make sure that you will be able to steward well the blessings that he has for you. So I pray that this was super helpful for you. As I was just meditating on this, it was just so much that was coming to me, and so much that I needed to honestly pray about in my own life, um, in terms of being able to receive the blessings of the Lord, to be able to receive it. And I think about Solomon, Solomon, when he became king of Israel, he had a big promise. He had big shoes to fill. He was David's son, and David was a man after God's own heart. And Solomon assumed the throne at a very young age. And when the Lord asked Solomon, what does he want from him? Solomon asked for wisdom to be able to be a good ruler, to be able to steward the people of Israel and the kingdom of Israel well. That is a prime example of asking the Lord to be able to receive the blessings that came with him. Because Solomon knew that he could receive the blessing of the kingdom, but if he didn't have wisdom, he could mismanage it, lead the people astray, or lose it. And so he asked for the wisdom to be able to steward it well. He asked for the ability to receive the blessing that God gave to him. And so I pray that this has been helpful for you. Definitely make sure you like this, love it, share with a friend, subscribe, leave a comment to let me know how this has helped you. I pray that this has blessed you as much as it did for me as I was preparing for this and meditating on this topic. I talk about this all the time: navigating the impossible, a survival guide for single moms from pregnancy through the first year of motherhood. So I definitely invite you to get a copy of this book. It is on Amazon, so make sure you grab a copy of the book. It's on Amazon. And Navigating the Impossible, or Survival Guide for Single Moms from Pregnancy through the First Year of Motherhood. So this book is just so full of wisdom, so full of just information to be able to help you along your way as a single mom, to be able to help you to walk through this process financially, emotionally, spiritually, to be able to build your support system and to really equip you on your journey to help you land well into single motherhood, so that way you can thrive. So I definitely encourage you to pick up a copy of this book. It's on Amazon. So thank you so much for joining, and you have an amazing day.